Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Lee St. James, and I'm the Managing Director of the Urban Robotics Foundation. We're delighted to have with us two incredible guest speakers for our panel discussion today, an executive update, preparing your community for robots in public spaces. I particularly want to extend a warm welcome also to John Young, who is one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Foundation, which is one of our global partners, and also to some people who are ICF community members who joined us. I think there's somebody from Georgia. I don't know if you want to put a little shout out in the chat or say hello, but I had never seen your city before, but Doug tells me you guys are doing amazing things, and look forward to hearing about some of that in our interactive discussion later. So let me take a moment to introduce you to the Urban Robotics Foundation. We're going to be providing you with an update today, a sort of a deep dive into our executive guide, which has been available on our website as a free download. But I know that when you download sometimes a 20-page document, you don't get a chance to read it or really understand all the nuances. So we have two experts with us today to take us through their perspectives on how this impacts them. URF is a membership-supported nonprofit organization. And at the end of this call, I'm going to invite any of you who are not members to join us. So I just want to give you a heads up that I am definitely interested in having more members join our stakeholder group and participate as we move forward. Our goal is to share best practices and help members prepare for the wide varieties of ways that PMRs will impact urban living. Doug McCollough is the Executive Director of the ICF Institute in Dublin, Ohio, and we're delighted to welcome him to our panel today. Doug works to connect people to communities, remove barriers, and promote change in initiatives ranging from smart and connected cities to IT workforce development, expanding broadband access, connected and autonomous vehicles, and smart mobility. Doug also serves as the Executive Director of the Beta District in Central Ohio, which organizes innovation development and investment in the smart mobility industry sectors. And he speaks as a subject matter expert and advocate on using technology for community development. It's notable that Dublin, Ohio is a 4-time ICF Smart 21 Community Award recipient and a 2-time ICF Top 7 community. And the ICF offers online training courses to share best practices in economic and community development. Through 2 decades of work with hundreds of communities, ICF has gained strategic insights into their development and turned these into analytics, recommendations, and training for economic developers, community developers, and elected and administrative leaders of local government. I invite you to find out more about ICF, and these links will be available for download access through our website when we post a blog and a YouTube recording. Our second speaker today is Viggy Ram, Vignesh, Viggy, I call him Viggy Ram. I hope that's okay, Viggy. He was Vice President of Public Policy with Serve Robotics, where he leads public affairs engagement for the future of robotic on-demand delivery. He most recently served on the policy teams at Match Group and Postmates, where his work focused on antitrust, the future of work, privacy, robotics, mobility, and how tech intersects with our communities. Spun off from Uber in 2021 as an independent company, Serve has completed tens of thousands of deliveries for enterprise partners such as Uber Eats and 7-Eleven. The company has scalable multi-year contracts, including a signed agreement to deploy up to 2,000 delivery robots in the Uber Eats platform across multiple US markets. And on the right, there is a picture of me seeing our first Serve robot here in the Toronto area. There's a demonstration zone up in Markham, and Viggy's actually standing at the end there. So I cropped the photo so you can see both of us. I was pretty excited to meet him in person after these years of working together. So now we're going to launch into a little bit of a preview. I'm going to show you some screenshots, sort of talk a little bit about the key elements of our executive guide. And we're just going to cover 4 of the main topics. And please, at any time, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. And Byrne and I will be addressing those during the break, sort of like after the panel discussion. And at any time, you're welcome to add those chat. And if Byrne sees something urgent, we'll interject that at the time. So let's just start with a couple of slides here. This is sort of two different pages in the book around navigating change and risks. So robots are designed in a near infinite array of sizes and purposes. The image on the left really talks about the evolution of robots from the industrial era robots, mobile robots, and now public area mobile robots. And the most popular type of those robots is the personal delivery devices, such as the ones that Serve offers. We all know that regulation follows innovation, but we stand at a crossroads where mobile robotics AI, and related technologies are transforming our public spaces at a pace that has never been seen before. These technologies offer tremendous potential while generating legitimate concerns, especially with public area mobile, like robots, robotaxis, and automated vehicles, which are being operated without a human driver on board. And for so public area mobility technologies, and then PMRs specifically that are used in public spaces like sidewalks, pathways, shopping malls, and airports. A city manager seeking to address labor shortages may see PMRs as a great solution, while a person with mobility challenges might view them as either a threat or an opportunity for enhanced accessibility. The challenge extends beyond achieving benefits like labor savings, sustainability, or cleaner and safer environments. The real test is ensuring cities and facility operators realize clear value while protecting and serving all community members. This is particularly important for regulators and innovators to get right, because we're introducing automated devices without visible human oversight into spaces where bystanders, pedestrians, and untrained individuals may not know what to expect or how to interact with these technologies. Now, as I said, the most popular type of PMR is the delivery robot, or in Toronto, we call them personal delivery devices, or MUDs, micro-utility devices. There's all kinds of different terms, but the International Standards Organization is committed to standardizing that as PMR, for public area mobile robot. And they're often used for last mile food delivery. Sorry, the PDDs are often used for last mile food delivery. So new use cases are constantly being tested and deployed in many locations, such as for mobility assistance, public safety, emergency response, cleaning, lawn mowing, and more. So now I'd like Doug to share about the public safety pilot project in Dublin, and then for Viggy to share about changing attitudes he's seen toward robots during his time at Serve. And he has some interesting phrases. I'd never heard the term techlash before. And so Viggy, hopefully you'll be able to share with us some of that. I'm going to stop sharing now so you can see and make the speakers full size on your screen. And so I'll hand it over to Doug and Viggy.
Sure, but would love to talk about the public safety, the autonomous safety robots that the city of Dublin is piloting coming up in the spring. And I really think that it's important to lead off with being a user or a use case. I think sometimes as a technologist, we tend to lead with the technology, and it's really fascinating when this is a public safety kind of instance here, and it's fascinating when you talk to people about the challenges that they have. This particular one is it's a robot that's going to monitor parking decks or a parking garage, and also a pedestrian bridge. And the reason why this is really interesting to me is in talking to police officers and law enforcement, one of the biggest challenges that they have are parking decks and parking garages. It's very difficult to patrol them. You can't just put a vehicle down there or a human in one parking deck. It's dark. They're difficult to get cameras into because they're made out of cement. Yes, you can put cable in there, but you're going to have challenges with wireless devices and things like that. A robot can go on 4 different floors of one of these things. It can go into the basement. It can move around. It can have lights on it, so it can light up dark corners, and it can monitor things in a way that a human or a vehicle would have trouble doing. And so this is a use case that certainly the police in the city of Dublin have been talking about for quite some time. It's a difficult place to get to, and you can imagine how this type of a robot can do those kinds of things. This is not assisted necessarily just with cameras on buildings. So we have a new library where the garage is that we're going to be testing this out on, and there are cameras up, and there are cameras on the outside of the parking deck, and none of those help you with the inside. This is where graffiti takes place. This is any number of different crimes or requests for help or safety may happen there. So the other major use case is on our pedestrian bridge, which goes across a good-sized river, and it can be tricky you can't patrol them with a vehicle, and a uniformed police officer is, just sort of looks out of place there. It's just not something that's easy to do. Cameras that you can move, speakers that you can communicate with citizens or residents are all hugely valuable. These robots will have buttons or access so that you could speak in a two-way conversation with a dispatch with law enforcement. You can have a conversation so they can ask a question to a person and they can report something out. That all spreads the access and the availability of your service as a city without necessarily spreading the amount of people that you're putting out there. The city is very important to the city to note that these don't replace people. They're not replacing uniformed officers. They're not taking jobs away from anything, but they are extending the reach of people to be able to see more and communicate more and monitor more. So all very exciting there. And one thing that I'll just mention here also, because I don't know if I'll have a chance to come back to it or if anyone cares, like, people get really weird about robots being around them. And you have to have a community communication plan in terms of helping people gain a comfort level. We are all at this point at a place where we're going to be welcoming more and more robots to work around us, and communicating correctly the first time is key. So I'll just mention that, the city of Dublin is going to have a contest to name one of these robots. Now that, to a lot of us who deploy things or run projects, it just seems kind of silly or unnecessary, or it couldn't be more important to engage a community on personalizing something, making it feel like it's their own. It's a part of the community. And so this robot will be named something, and you've included people. And you're going to include people a lot better by having that type of an activity than you are having community meetings, right? Where you say, hey, come out and learn about these robots, and we're going to give you a lecture and you can ask us any questions you have. 6 months later after that, people are going to report that they had no idea this thing was coming. Nobody talked to them. And so having some fun and engaging with people, I think, is going to be critical to having more and more robots out on our streets and on our bridges and in our garages. So I'll take a pause there, Lee, make sure I've said everything about that you were expecting. And Bern has a question.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Just before you move, I want to put Judy's question to Doug right now while it's fresh in your mind, Doug. The question is, have there been any concerns yet expressed regarding privacy or identifiable information? Has that been a pretty concern yet?
Yeah, so hopefully we've gotten ahead of that beforehand. So our communication with the community is that there will be no facial recognition. There is no personal recognition. There are cameras, and you're trying to hit that sweet spot with people. Some people feel intruded upon, that we're living in a police state and you're always monitoring me. Some people feel unsafe when they're going to some places around a community. They want to know, I think a lot of us have gotten used to some of these cameras in the parking lot. It makes us feel kind of better. Someone's watching this. This is being recorded. That gives a confidence level. But facial recognition, that's a problem. And so the community has come out very strong to say there is no facial recognition as part of this. I don't know if that answers that question, Bern.
Thank you.
I believe it does. Judy, if you're okay with that, let Lee, we should move on.
Yeah, Viggy, it's over to you.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Vignesh Ram, I go by Viggy. I lead public policy at Serve Robotics, and really excited to be here. Thank you to URF, to Bern, and to Lee for leading this conversation. It's a really important one. I think Doug kind of touched upon sort of the broader sort of landscape that both regulators and innovators have been looking at in this space, and a lot of the concerns that come up. And it's a timely discussion, I think, because we've seen, Lee had mentioned techlash. Over the course of the last 15 or so years, we've seen the dialogue around emerging technology, especially micromobility, sort of shift over that time, from 2010 or so through 2018. There was a period where Uber and Lyft and Airbnb started opening up operations in cities across not just America and Canada, but across the globe. And cities did not have a very easy way to sort of address some of the challenges that would come up. In the case of Uber and Lyft, whether it was congestion or cars that were entering airports. In the case of Airbnb, the potential for rising rents. And that all kind of came to a head with the conversation around electric scooters and other micromobility forms, where for many of those businesses, they're trying to induce demand. The more scooters that they get out there, the more those are going to be used. And for cities, they want to make sure that there isn't sidewalk clutter, that there aren't scooters that are occupying the sidewalk, preventing people from getting through. For many regulators, they're concerned that if someone has ambulatory challenges, if someone is, might be using a mobility aid, that they should be able to traverse our public spaces in a way that's safe and unimpeded. But one of the challenges right now, especially when it comes to PMRs and for the future of PDDs, is that autonomous technology is already here. Waymo has already exceeded Lyft's market share in San Francisco and is entering several other markets this year. That includes Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Miami. And delivery robots are kind of the tip of the spear in this conversation around autonomy. They're slower and smaller than automobiles, and they present an opportunity for cities to sort of regulate them in a way that's agile, and for companies to also adapt, because you're not using a large form factor. You're not having to over engineer for sort of complex problems in the roadway. There's a different set of complex problems, which are really around how these devices are able to navigate on sidewalks and chaotic environments. And in our case, in Serve Robotics case, every delivery that's done removes a car off the road. Lee had mentioned that we do fulfillment for Uber Eats, and basically what that means is we show up the same way that a vehicle or shows up on the Uber Eats platform. The robot goes to the restaurant, they pick up the order, and then goes and drops it off at the customer's residence or wherever they're located. And the reason that this is a problem that we see as needing to be solved is that last mile logistics has been unsustainable for too long. Why does it cost $2 to get something from China and $8 to get something from Chinatown? And one of the major reasons is that long distance logistics and freight has a ton of autonomy in the process, everything from shipping through how ports operate, whereas sort of last mile logistics is still really just one person holding a package and trying to drop it off at your home. In those cases, the companies that tend to be the most successful tend to build a warehouse outside of a city. So this is sort of Amazon's business model. You build a warehouse and you funnel all your goods in, and all that does is incentivize the residents of a city to shop outside of the city. They're not supporting local businesses. It's many of their much of their capital is being invested elsewhere. So why not look at your city itself as the warehouse? You have tons of mom and pop brick and mortar businesses that exist that are looking to expand their reach to be able to compete with these large e-commerce retailers, and additionally be able to remove some of those box trucks off the road that are occupying these sort of really turbulent public spaces. So I think there's sort of a shared interest between innovators and cities in terms of how we're able to take back these public spaces and try and make them a little more responsive to the needs of sort of the modern era. But this kind of requires two shifts in thinking between both companies and regulators. I think on the business side, one of the things that we've been looking at over time is how we're able to design for these complex environments. So instead of just saying, hey, we're going to try and build a very cheap or affordable robot and deploy it, can we build one that has advanced sensors, or one that has Braille on the device, ones where we're thinking about what the light design looks like, so it's conveying intent. When a robot is moving on a busy sidewalk in Hollywood, for example, we want to make sure that the people that are moving around, there's folks that are street performers, there are folks that are vending at the street corner, that the robot is able to communicate with those people where it's going. So even having eyes on the robot that signal intent can show people and help them anticipate the robot's movements and be able to move around them. But also from an engagement perspective, it's oftentimes innovators will kind of think about their customers as, for the restaurants that are on the platform, or the customer that's actually purchasing the product, but that's not really your customer, right? When a robot is deployed, it's interacting with hundreds of people as it's traveling on the sidewalk, and as well as with the regulators that are going to be hearing from those constituents about whether robots are operating safely. So, finding ways to have a white glove experience where we actually have a presence on the ground. We have folks that are meeting people, that are engaging with local business leaders, engaging with regulators around their concerns. Deploying new technologies is not always going to be a seamless process, but we want to make sure that it's one in which folks are feel bought in and engaged. The shift in thinking, I think, on the regulatory side is that for sort of that early period of techlash, we saw cities kind of be like, okay, there's something new, we don't really know how to tackle it. So you would see either that they would have unfettered access to be able to operate, or you'd see a city like Austin sort of shut down Uber operations entirely and try and get their hands around how that works. And neither of those really tended to work. And that push and pull has sort of continued through electric scooters as well, where there were either you'll see cities that have outright banned them, other cities that they seem to be everywhere and occupying the public space in a way that many of us might feel might have a difficult time traversing through. And so finding ways that we can build pilots that lead to permanence is I think tremendously important. So this allows regulators to be able to look at your operations, to be able to look at your performance, and then be able to log, okay, how many car trips are being taken off the road? How open have you been about data sharing? For example, for our robots, we're collecting maps of sidewalks. We do map out all of the areas where there are inaccessible curb cuts. That's all really important information. If a robot can't traverse a sidewalk safely, then someone who's using a wheelchair or other mobility aid likely can't either. So with the city of West Hollywood, for example, we'll actually share out all of the non-ADA compliant curb cuts. And this isn't, none of this information is proprietary, right? Anybody that can go outside can go and see that a sidewalk has these challenges. So these are really good opportunities for us to share that data out, work with the city to try and improve that infrastructure. And so, trying to find ways for us to align our incentives is going to be tremendously important as we advance through this process. But I think, we're still in the early days, and as people get more familiarized with it, as we I think there's really a ton of opportunities for both productivity gains as well as taking back our public spaces. So I'm going to leave it there. I know there's going to be a lot of opportunity for conversation.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I want to get in an early question. The question came in quite a while ago, and it's for you, Viggy, and that is, and it leads to other questions as well, but it's an important issue about integration. And this particular question is, what's the opportunity for robot packages to be paired with public transit? I've already interacted with Ellen, who asked this question. Is she talking about bus parcel express kind of a concept, if you remember that from years ago? But her point is that we might be able to use public transport after hour, outside of rush hours in some coordinated fashion. Have you thought about that issue at all? That way of integrating with public transit for delivery?
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation's been one that's been around for a long time, right? So in the case of rideshare and last mile delivery, both of those sort of third-party delivery models essentially came up because it would be, the idea was there is an unused vehicle and there's a need for some good to be transported somewhere. In the case of rideshare, it was like, I'm going to be driving across town, like I could pick someone up along the way, and they of course would be willing to pay me to get there. As we start thinking about ways of making this more efficient, instead of having innumerable vehicles that are occupying our public space, like these sort of hub and spoke concepts have come up quite frequently. I think one of the challenges here is trying to figure out proofs of concept, but I think everyone, folks that have an open mind can actually sort of drive that forward. In our case, we're currently working on a drone delivery pilot with Wing, which is sort of Google's drone delivery platform. But the way that works is a robot does the pickup at the restaurant or at the business. Businesses don't want, a ton of drones that are sitting outside of their business flying around waiting for the order. So it actually improves the experience on their end. But then the robot is able to travel to a parking lot that might have some empty space. And in that parking lot, hand it off to a drone that then does sort of the rest of the delivery. So it can, it expands our range from the, 2 kilometers or so to potentially 10. And so as we think about this, there are innumerable vehicles that could fit into that ecosystem. I think one piece that drives it is pedestrianization will incentivize hub and spoke models naturally, because if vehicular traffic cannot enter the city center, then businesses will automatically adjust and will sort of shift to modalities that will operate in that space. But the flip side of it is that for the innovator side and for the businesses that are operating in the space, is keeping an open mind and finding pilots and proofs of concept with other businesses that we can use to expand our reach as well. Because if robots are able to do longer distance deliveries in tandem with drones or with buses, for example, and public transit, I think for us it actually expands our reach as well. We're able to do a higher amount of volume. That means that there's fewer idle robots, so you don't run into the same problem that you do with scooters. So yeah, I think it requires a couple of shifts in thinking on both sides.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Viggy and Doug, for your comments on that. I want to start sharing my screen again. I just have a couple more slides within the executive guide that I think will be valuable for the last part of our conversation. So our next topic is how the recommended or likely path for PMR adoption can be brought to fruition. I think that some of the questions that are coming in the chat are ideal for this. So in URF's executive guide, we provide a high-level overview of the 5 technology enablers you can see on the right, on the sort of the top left-hand side of the double-page spread. And then we also look at the demographic and environmental drivers of adoption, the 4 key challenges for successful adoption, and then we provide a recommended path forward. Obviously, you can read this in your own guide, so I'm not going to read all that material out loud for you, but I just wanted you to be aware that this material is structured in this way so that it provides some support for you. And then I also wanted to talk about the governance challenges. So the emergence of PMRs represents a complex interplay between technological innovation, urban needs, standards development, regulatory frameworks, and governance systems. And I'm going to ask our panelists now to share about what it means to learn by doing, and the need for redundancy, and how to measure failure rate, and a number of other things. So there will also clearly be a need for different policy regimes based on local community needs that differ between urban core, suburban ring, and more rural infrastructure settings. I know, Doug, that we talked about that in terms of what you're seeing in the Ohio market. So maybe I'll have Viggy, if you want to start by talking about the learn by doing, and then Doug, you can talk a little bit more about the different policy regimes, and then we'll open up the floor, and Bern, you can facilitate some more questions.
Yeah, great. This is, I think one of the challenges here, we talked about sort of aligning incentives, but when a lot of cities have been trying to figure out what the regulatory regime for PDDs or for delivery robots looked like, there'd be some instances where they'd come up with a test case where they'd say, look, like you should operate in this incredibly sparsely populated area because that would be a good test case for you. And it's understandable from a regulatory standpoint. I think the regulator is concerned about risk and about political blowback. But when we are trying to operate our devices, if we're operating in a more sparsely populated area, we don't get the opportunity to learn what it's like to engage with individuals and pedestrians that are operating on the sidewalk. You really need that information to be able to build your autonomy stack, to be able to make sure that you're operating safely. And additionally, because we're doing short distance deliveries, there's just there are more deliveries in dense areas. There's less of a likelihood that you have idle robots, and idle robots tend to be more dangerous because they're slightly less predictable, right? It's because it's sitting there, and if there's someone who's trying to traverse the sidewalk, it can be a little bit challenging to go around them. So I think one of the there's been sort of a spread of ways in which different places have tried to tackle this. I really applaud, I think, both Los Angeles and West Hollywood on this. Both of those cities decided to do pilot programs that allow you to operate some number of robots and then increase that number of robots based upon what your operations look like and the responsiveness that you have with the city. In both instances, we have a data sharing process with the city. I mentioned earlier that, an incident might occur, but we want to make sure that we are tackling it, that we're talking to them. I think for most regulators in the space, they want to make sure that, we are responding to concerns as they come in, that, even if we can't make a change in this current technology stack, that the next one is going to be responsive to it, that or that we're carrying an adequate insurance plan, that in our case we carry an automotive insurance policy, so any incidents that occur get sort of run through the insurance process, but additionally that as you prove that you were able to operate safely, your operational design domain, or the location which you're able to operate, grows, and then over time you're able to deploy more devices. In West Hollywood, for example, West Hollywood is about almost 4 square kilometers, and there are currently allowed to be 40 robots within those 4 square kilometers, which might seem like a lot, but it's not even at a point of full saturation, to give you, and the amount of conflict that happens there is not as much as I think people would think out the gate. So I think that's like a very sort of specific example about how this works. But ultimately, I think being able to go from pilot to permanence is really important, and having sort of measurable indices on how you do that, as opposed to something that's sort of amorphous, because then I think that creates unpredictability both for the operator and for the regulator.
Amazing stuff. I love listening to you, Viggy. I learned a lot from what's going on. So I'm going to give a shout out to flyover country, and so I'm not talking about West Hollywood or Los Angeles, and this is not against what you're saying here. A lot of us sitting here in Ohio, we received the innovations and have received across the years a number of different things in micromobility and rideshare and new delivery types of things. And I really do understand this concern that we have. It's really a balance between density and remoteness. And what I'm seeing is some communities or some innovations be introduced and say, we need density. Why? Because the market is this top 50 cities. And that's where we're going, and we're going to prove it out there, and then we'll take it somewhere else. But when you take systems that have been proven in more dense areas to suburbs or outer rings, often you have clashes, and there's differences in philosophy and really differences in operations and those things. So understanding that, I think, is a very important lesson. And we talked at another time about the multitude of different technologies, systems, innovations that have been introduced that we're not learning lessons from as we talk about urban robotics, that largely we're talking about on sidewalks. We're talking about on areas that a pedestrian would otherwise be. We're generally not talking about where a passenger vehicle would be. So I really appreciate also that Viggy had talked about our demands as residents and as consumers, and how much really we order from China, but not Chinatown. All of our communities, particularly in suburbs, but all of our communities want great restaurants, but we don't want food delivery trucks and garbage trucks. And there are no great restaurants without a lot of delivery. And so I'm fascinated by the opportunity to, if we were to rebuild this as a computer stack, we would put the difficult things to park and move in an alley or in some place. And just as Viggy is saying, you would cluster, some of the heavy lifting somewhere where there's not a lot of foot traffic or wheelchair traffic or micromobility, and you would just you would have more volume going in there. We're going to get there by really thinking about the differences in the environments, and we need to build a system that works in an entire urban area which is going to include a suburban ring. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also just the differences between an urban core and a suburb. And I've gone to a lot of different communities, and there are some real similarities between, cities tend to think in this way. You're generally going to get paid parking in cities. And suburbs like attracting people out of cities with free parking. Parking is free. You can just look at your hotel app and you'll see the differences between Hotel A with, parking is available on site for a fee, and Hotel B that, parking is free. There's different levels of expectations among consumers, different uses of sidewalks and multi-use trails, same material, same name, but different expectations by the community. And so the other thing that I'll say is that as we really try to get to a regulatory regime or policy development, there are vast differences between how urban cores see this, how states see it, and how suburbs and more rural areas see it. And a lot of us in a suburb will look at us in a urban core and say, well, what are they going to do? This is what we did with scooters, e-scooters, and other micromobility. Do we outlaw them and just ban them completely until we can wrap our head around that? Well, the suburbs are waiting for you to do that so that they can pounce and say, hey, you can use it here. And there is a back and forth and a competitiveness in regions that I think it would be in our interest to acknowledge that, we're sometimes we're coordinating well and sometimes we're not. And that is natural. And it's not good for technology like an Uber or somebody like that to come in and say, we want a single statewide policy, because I can guarantee you our statewide policymakers are not good at addressing different environments and different kind of places like that. So I don't know if I got off track there, but those are the things that popped into my head with what Viggy is saying there. But also, how can we introduce these things with the legacy and history of micromobility, of pedestrianism, of self-driving cars, and soon, the rest of drone delivery, and then robot delivery. How can we build a master system, really, and not create a policy that's not going to work when advanced air mobility comes along, right? Ultimately, these need to be flexible, pliable, kind of enlightened things that our community has been prepared for, so that we're having these conversations and the bike riders don't hate the joggers, and they don't hate the robots, and everybody's angry with everybody because we've limited ourselves in thinking there's just one roadway, when in fact there are as many as we need. So my thought.
That's wonderful, Doug. And in fact, it really just speaks to the idea of how complex it will be for regulators to address these topics, and in a way that's flexible and that can pivot when new technologies come along. And I think that that's really something that Byrne is very passionate about. And I know that there are lots of things that we could say about a regulatory guide, which hopefully some of you will be inspired to help sponsor some of our work on getting further ahead on our regulatory guide. But in the meantime, why don't we take pause now to review the chat? Byrne, if you wanted to address some of our audience's questions, and if you have questions for either of our speakers or myself, or Byrne, please go ahead and pop them in. Or
let me bring in a question from John Young, one of the co-founders of ICF, and he's addressing to Viggy. Do you eventually see the distribution of urban robots in cities like the evolution of bike sharing nodes? That's question one. This could be energized there and be energized there and be provided with maintenance, or are there other and better models being considered? So it's really about how do these get distributed as they grow in scale beyond the current distribution methods that you use now. I've added that to the question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, John. I think for the last couple of years we've heard these conversations about like curb modernization, or about and it hasn't had like a real sort of applied meaning. It's something that people talk about at conferences, but it isn't the kind of thing where it's like you really understand what that's going to look like for cities. One of the things that we found really interesting is that as a last mile delivery provider, we have a very good sense of where the imports and exports are in a city. So we know the locations where a lot of goods are purchased from restaurants or businesses and funneled outward. And then we also have a sense of what communities tend to order stuff online or through e-commerce platforms. And basically what that means is that that information could be invaluable to cities that are thinking about developing pickup and loading zones, to think about areas that could be pedestrianized. And then when you pedestrianize that specific stretch, where do you put the pickup and loading zone or the sort of handoff location in that infrastructure network? This isn't a now problem just because there's still a fair way to go. It can be pretty challenging for cities to try and pedestrianize an entire street. But it is the kind of thing that I think folks should be thinking about as they have these conversations. So in terms of bike sharing nodes, that was a way. Bike sharing nodes tend to chase the areas of demand. We also chase demand. We'll go to the neighborhoods that tend to have the highest volume first. And that's sort of irrespective of what the regulatory landscape looks like, right? Like there could be suburban neighborhoods that are a little bit more challenging for delivery robots because once you finish one trip, trying to get to another could be a little bit challenging. But so I think I think that using the data about imports and exports is going to be tremendously important as we try to tackle these challenges. I think the other piece of this that's really important for regulators to consider is that in the case of delivery robots, we have a delivery success rate of 99.8%, but that means that 1 out of every 500 deliveries fails. And when we talk about what delivery failure is, that includes all incidents, anything from being hit by a car to losing Wi-Fi or a 5G connection through it getting stuck in a tree well, or having a contact with a pedestrian, and all of those are significantly lower than vehicular traffic. So cars, for example, carry 3,000 times the kinetic energy of a delivery robot, are operating at several times the speed, and have a higher rate of failure. So as we look at what the implications are for right sizing delivery. So this is in the urban center, having robots or bicycles for sort of like a longer distance. I think that has implications for how you design the built landscape, and even for businesses like ours, like the partnerships that might be available. What other companies can we work with to sort of extend that range and make sure that we're actually providing a meaningful service to the city and its residents.
Okay. Bern, any other questions that you wanted to put in at this point?
Can I respond in that before Bern goes in another direction?
Of course, Doug. Thank you. Yes, please.
I just want to share on that also, just coming back to the benefits to the entire community, both as individuals and then collectively as a community. And I really do continue thinking about the economic benefits, the health benefits. Often we talk about pedestrianizing an area without, and some people love it and other people hate it, as opposed to, here are some health benefits, community health, and we're tracking some of those benefits in terms of walking, in terms of access to healthcare, all sorts of different things that are enabled by developing a different kind of mobility system and different use of a community. And at the end of the day, we are heading towards a different kind of community than maybe we grew up with in the 1950s or after World War II, when the suburbs and kind of the idyllic human community in America was kind of idealized, right? And we're approaching a very, very different vision of that. And that includes delivery, it includes walking, it includes walkable cities, it includes amenities, it includes tracking data on all of our health and public safety and things like that. It's a very different vision. And I think that it's in our best interest. I know we're talking about robots, but it's in our best interest to talk about human wellness and human benefits that robots enable. And it's not about the robot, really. It's about a system that we can all share as a community, which includes some automated machinery, whether that's drones or robots. It includes some IoT, but it also includes different lifestyles for ourselves. And we need to lead with some of that, that our technical future and present is enabled by lifestyle changes and a different vision of an idyllic community.
Yeah.
I want to add on to what you've just said, Doug. There's a question, a comment, and a suggestion really from Sandra. The question is, are you creating new collaborations with city leaders to communicate the benefits, the kind of benefits that you were espousing just now, Doug? And you know, this is to both of you, you know, to strengthen acceptance and so forth. Can you speak to the issues of what kinds of programs you would like to see or that you've already engaged in? I'm sure Serve is engaged in some of that, I suppose. And Doug, I think that's sort of the central to what you're doing. So I'd like you both to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I'll start. In addition to being the executive director of the Intelligent Community Forum Institute in Dublin, Ohio, I'm also the executive director of the Beta District, which is really a conversation about smart mobility. They would say smart mobility. I would say future of mobility, which really focuses on breaking mobility systems into systems, collaborative, integrated systems. And having a delivery robot system is not as good as having an integrated system of travel and mobility and just a larger picture that really we're not ready to be having that conversation too much yet, but really that's where we need to go. And so the Beta District is a council of governments between the city of Dublin, the city of Marysville, and Union County. And it is suburban and it's remote and it's less dense, but there are opportunities to do some testing and have some conversations there. So the kinds of programmings that you will sense it from my answers all day today that I am promoting is there's a lot of question about residents and city council meetings and where do the planning and zoning kind of thing. These are the traditional places where these conversations take place. We need to get involved we need to change how we discuss these things where those are concerns. And if we can do that with our urban core, which we are starting to do, those of you not from Ohio will not be familiar with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. This is planning and technology and innovation. These are the rooms within which we can have these kinds of conversations. And Bern, you and I have discussed, collaborative intergovernment policy development sort of boards or committees or, some sort of small grouping that you could put together. And we're contemplating doing that with another intelligent community out of the city of Hilliard, possibly Westerville. These are a number of communities here. Those conversations can lead to policy innovation, which has to accompany technical innovation.
I want to add to that, Doug, I think all the ideas that you're expressing really are epitomized in the whole, I think, values of what the Intelligent Community Forum is about, and also the Urban Robotics Foundation, which is why we're such great partners. We've had webinars in the past with people from Tallinn, Estonia, and from Odense, Denmark, recognizing them. And Sandra, this goes to your comment about, can we organize some or identify a few leadership cities, in terms of being robot friendly. And in fact, Odense is known as sort of a major robotics hub in all of Europe, and Tallinn is where they've been using sidewalk robots and delivery robots and now many other types of robots for many years now. So we also had a webinar in the UK and with looking at the examples provided by LEAD. So trying to share best practices not just within North America but globally is really what the Urban Robotics Foundation is about. And I think that trying to bring all these groups of stakeholders together in a way that is affordable and time sensitive is also really meaningful. So we'll talk about that at the end. We just have a couple more minutes. Viggy, was there anything else that you wanted to add? Just because I know Bern had asked both of you and Doug to comment on that.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep it short. I think as we one of the challenges here is trying to figure out that our built environment and what modalities are utilizing the built environment are actually responsive to one another. And that is a real challenge. I think, in the abstract, we all know that if you were in a dense urban core with narrow streets, you wouldn't want a bunch of people that are driving Ford F-150s down that street. And that, there are there's a reason why certain we have, when you enter certain cities, they might say, look, like, we don't want big rigs on our roadways. Being able to anticipate what that looks like is really important, and that's why a lot of these data sharing opportunities can be really helpful. It helps cities wrap their hands around where operators are going, where there is delivery volume in our case, and there these sort of fora. So I think URF, ICF. I'm also going to throw a shout out to the Open Mobility Foundation, which actually brings some folks together in a forum around data sharing with cities. Are all immeasurably valuable. I think from there, sort of the next step is figuring out how to be able to collaborate in a way, right? I think one of the challenges is a lot of cities, as they're trying to embark on these sort of pilot programs and all, their tools usually procurement, and just because a company can sort of overcome the procurement hurdle does not mean that they're the best suited operator for the thing that they're trying to do. So sometimes you end up with sort of an inefficient or unhelpful sort of regime that's been put in place purely because of what that system enabled. So coming up with these sort of test cases, I think, you were talking about these sort of model cities or these I often think it could be very helpful if business improvement districts or business improvement associations could say, hey, we want to do a test pilot in this particular region. That then, a business like ours could work with that association or with that district, come up with a plan, and then do our operations there. And that could be the test case that then expands out within that city or ultimately that region, because then it allows folks locally to go and see what the operations are like, get familiar with it. But even for us, it also allows us to do our testing in a part of the city where it makes sense, right? I think, I was mentioning, we want to operate in places that are dense. Some cities will say, look, go operate somewhere that's not dense because we're so freaked out about what can happen. But if we're able to find a friendly business improvement district where it makes a lot of sense for us to do this, I think that is a perfect use case to then turn around and show some results from and move from there. So I think re-examining some of our processes so that we can be really responsive to these new modalities is really important.
Perfect. Let me throw in a last comment. I know we need to turn back to you, Lee, in about 2 more minutes, if I have that right. I got an email this morning. Sorry, I saw a LinkedIn post this morning from a city. It happened to be the city of Ottawa, capital of Canada, and they were boasting that they're about to enter their 25-year planning cycle. They're going to write their 25-year transportation plan. And my comment to 25-year planners, and that's a common thing for cities to do, to pick up a long plan, is that we need wider space for slower and smaller devices. Anything from, I call it pedestrian, biking, bots, wheelchairs, micromobility, all of these smaller, slower, lighter devices. You talked about momentum earlier, Viggy. And I think we need somehow to have a movement towards wider space for smaller, slower devices and vehicles and travel and active transportation, at the expense of the wider, heavier vehicles, of course, because cities are constrained in their space. But I'm throwing that out as a comment. If either of you want to comment on that before we turn it back to Lee, but we need to change how cities are designed.
I'll make a comment just saying, coming from here, Viggy mentioned the F-150. We're in the center of the F-150 universe here in Central Ohio, and it's a drug, and it's difficult to get off of. So I really like wider, slower. We need to rethink. We're going to have F-150s, right? And that's fine. But we need to figure out where the appropriate places and uses and speeds and those things are. And the last thing I'll say is that if you sit down with members of cities, they all want to do this. Every city wants this. They just don't necessarily have the information, the expertise in the room when they're doing their 25-year vision statement or plan or those kinds of things. So we just need to work together and share lessons learned. But I don't believe there is a city that doesn't want to do this. They just don't know how, and the nervousness takes over, as Viggy has sort of described. So.
All right, well, that's great. Thank you so much. I want to flag the fact that we have 2 upcoming events that we wanted to share with you. Ohio's Future of Mobility Conference that Doug is organizing and involved with, and all of these links will be provided to you as a follow-up to this webinar. And then also URF's next webinar is on May 21st, and it's titled Curbside Management, Robo-Taxis and PMRs, the Challenge of Pickup and Drop-Off. And Viggy, you alluded to this in your statement. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and your questions. We will, I know there were a couple more questions we didn't have time to address today. We will stay on after this session if you have questions, but I did want to flag that we are a membership supported organization, and we would love for all of you to join our stakeholder group to expedite your learning journey, to minimize the risks and increase your organizational capacity. We'd love for you to leverage our expert network, share best practices, and help shape international standards for safe, accessible deployment. And I know that there was a comment from Judy about, university, your future transportation planners need to be educated. I think that also the existing transportation planners can be trained through some of the advisory work and the workshops that we offer. So URF is really committed to offering more workshops. We have a discovery course on for public area mobile robots and other mobility innovations, and we'd love to set up something if you're interested. And just a big thank you overall to our members, partners, and supporters for ensuring that the Urban Robotics Foundation can continue to do the important work that we're doing. So thank you, everybody, for participating. Again, Byrne, Viggy, Doug, and I will stay on for a few minutes. John, if you wanted to get your question answered, or Judy, we're welcome to do that. But I wanted to honor the timeline we had agreed to. So thank you, everybody.